Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. We are here with you to bring you a special Halloween episode. We have a number of Halloween episodes this month, but this is one of the ones I've been most excited about because it's going to be all about Over the Garden Wall, the TV miniseries that was ran on Cartoon Network a number of years ago, specifically about the new art book that's been released, which is The Art of Over the Garden Wall. Official fall ritual for me is pretty similar to a lot of folks I know, which is we sit and we rewatch the award-winning animated series Over the Garden Wall. I watch it every year, and this year I might even actually do it twice. And with the new Dark Horse published book, The Art of Over the Garden Wall, the second rewatch of the season is going to have some additional richness and meaning for me because I'll know even more about the making of the show, how the production was made, how to look at all of the beautiful stills, storyboards, and pieces of ephemera around the show that can really help you appreciate it in a different light. And joining me to talk about it today is the writer of Art of Over the Garden Wall, Sean Edgar. Say hello.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I had put on Twitter that I was looking for other folks who were interested in talking about the series to do a sort of a roundtable, and a Twitter mutual of ours said, "Why don't you have on Sean Edgar, who literally wrote the book that just came out?" And I thought that's a good idea. So
yeah,
you are meeting me in a place of fandom.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It came out then. I think people seem to dig it, but I mean, when Pat is involved with anything, and then you have Nick Cross, it's hard for something not to look good, right?
Oh yeah, it's a beautiful book. So do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about it? I would just say, folks, for anybody who hasn't seen the miniseries yet, it's on Hulu. Go watch it right now, or in my case, it's been on my DVR for a number of years, preserved. But go watch the miniseries. It is a absolutely beautiful piece of television, one of the most beautiful animated shows I've ever seen, one of my favorite animated things of all time. Very few things, I think, really capture the spirit of the fall season the way it does, and it transitions from sort of a spooky Halloween story to really encompassing a whole range of feelings and wistfulness and character development and growth, and kind of brings in the coming of winter at the end. So from here on in, we will assume that you have watched the cartoon series. It's only, what is it? It's like 10 little short episodes. So it's about the length of
I mean, all in all, it's about, like 60 minutes.
Crazy. It's amazing how much story and richness they can bring in. So go watch it and then come back and join us. Okay, so from here on out, this is a spoiler-filled, 100%, we assume you've seen the show, production. So Sean, how did you get connected with working on this project?
Sure. So, I mean, for most of the time, I'm kind of in your position. I'm an editor. I'm a writer for various publications, and I was interviewing Pat for something, and I'd seen the show, and I'd adored it. Just looking over it, it seems like everything was so meticulously thought out. But at the same time, what Pat was drawing from was so obscure to what we consider as modern mainstream consumers. Mm-hmm. So when you think of the influences that go into something and you think of what Pat put into Over the Garden Wall, I just really wanted to dive into it and explore those roots. And so I emailed Pat and I said we should do an art book, and he was down. And then I emailed Dark Horse, and they said they were down. And I wish I had a more exciting creation story, but it was an incredibly easy, seamless project to get greenlit. And from there on out, Pat and I spent possibly, 30 hours on the phone just going over everything. So he'd compiled like these giant hard drives full of material from the show. And we're talking about like tons of scraps of paper that he did, and as well as other things from Nick, the storyboard artist, the sketch artist, the designers, all of that. So there was a lot of material to go through. So the process was just going through that and trying to put a narrative around it. And hopefully it turned out pretty good.
Oh, absolutely. I feel like if this book wasn't there, all of us fans would be chasing down all these information on our own, and you kind of put the scavenger hunt together.
Yes. I mean, the thing is, it goes deeper. There was stuff we didn't include that I can't quite talk about, but like, I mean, Pat just went all out on this project, and just the amount of tendrils through it, it was massive. But I'm happy for what got put in there. It's huge.
Yeah, for me, like, one of the things that attracted me to the series, beyond just the very high production values, were how thorough and rich this world and setting were, and how much it was a setting and place that I needed to see on film, that I had missed and had been absent so much from animation, even like really great animation that's happening today. And I listened a couple of months ago when I first started thinking about doing this episode. I listened to somebody else's podcast about Over the Garden Wall. I shall not. It's just a single episode of somebody's show. There isn't like a whole podcast series dedicated to it. Wish there was. Someone should do that. I would listen to it. Anyway, and in it, the person just didn't seem to understand the source material, and like thought that it was making different references to. They just didn't recognize the Americana and the different sources in that. And it made me sad to think that there's these chunks of American cultural history that I learned about as a student of art, and that I don't think there's much literacy around right now. And people shouldn't have to all know these things, but people should have the opportunity to learn them. And I think that the show is, you know, a way that people might actually first see some of these visual motifs now who might not have been exposed to them earlier. And through the book, they'll actually be able to find out what are those sources, what are those references. And, and just being able, Yeah,
I mean, so much of what Pat, and when I say Pat, I mean Pat McHale, he's the showrunner and creator of the show, was going through. I mean, a lot of it was, it kind of references his time in a place called Concord, Massachusetts. So when he was first going to college and around Los Angeles, he just kind of felt the need to spend some time in a place that was more historical, and as he said, quote unquote, with more ghosts as opposed to kind of the glitz of Los Angeles. He went to this colonial, steeped in history, kind of sleepy place called Concord. And that really is the unknown. It even has a giant grist mill.
Wow.
Everything about that place. And the Transcendentalists, they used to spend a lot of time there. And I think if you want to see a real-life equivalent to sort of that autumnal segue, he kind of walked through it. But what he would say is that Over the Garden Wall mirrors his time in that, how he kind of went when there was a lot of foliage, and how when he left, it was the bare of winter. So it's definitely a devotion to, you know, Hudson River Valley paintings, as much as like McLaughlin Brothers, you know, board games and books, but also very much it's rooted in the East Coast and where he was in Massachusetts. So that's pretty astute. Yeah,
I think like I grew up in the Mid-Atlantic region, and we did a lot of history-focused regional tourism as a kid. Not a lot of beach trips and amusement parks. There was a lot more visiting of Jamestown and Colonial Williamsburg. And I think that these artistic styles are particularly just remote from anything that the pop cultural art is referencing. Like, I think that most of our fantasy visuals draw a lot from Tolkien, and therefore from a very Western European, British sort of visual tradition. And then younger folks are just really coming out of anime, so they kind of have this westernized view of Japanese perspective of folklore and history that they can sometimes wield without the right sensitivity. And we have stuff in America too that has our own folklores and our own folk traditions. And we're looking at the book, seeing how there's somebody pointed out that they were at risk of having Greg look too much like Johnny Appleseed. And I just thought, when was the last time somebody has freaking mentioned Johnny Appleseed to me in any kind of a conversation? I can't, and I was like, oh, that's right, with the hat. Like that isn't even on the radar. The sort of way that the cat illustrations are drawn. I'm as a cat owner, like when you look at cats in real life, cats these days, they don't look like cats in the old days. No siree. But like seeing sort of the Victorian cat postcards, because yes, cat memes have been going on since before the internet. You can just see the whole different way of looking at animals. One of the fun things that I got reading the book was they originally they were going to have the brothers get turned into animals briefly, and the animal that Greg was going to have been turned into was unclear whether that Wirt was going to have been turned into. It was unclear whether or not he was a dog or a bear, and that's because it was done in old time animation style. So who can tell anyway? And there would have been a whole bit around that. And I just had to laugh because like that kind of knowledge of the animation history and source material, I think, brings a lot of beauty to this.
Oh, yeah, totally. I mean, when you look back at some of those old 19th century drawings of animals, it's not like they had photos, so it was kind of like a tin can game of just like reading descriptions and trying to get it down. So it's funny when you look at the alligator and or crocodile from the pilot. It was based on a Jose Guadalupe Posada drawing. And it's not supposed to be anatomically correct. It's supposed to be kind of charming homage to how illustrators thought animals looked as opposed to what they actually look like.
Yeah. I think that the whole entire look of the series being so handcrafted and hand-drawn is why it's beautiful. And it's something that the book really shows us, like how it's done, how that process worked. I really hate modern computer animation. I think it looks ugly. I realize that my opinion of that is formed by how old I am, and I grew up, before that was a thing. And then early computer animation was particularly ugly. So now I can't really see and appreciate the modern computer animation that is better because I'm kind of scarred for life at how ugly the earlier stuff was. But
Sure.
It's sort of time and sensitivity and shading and the colored pencil work and the painting that really helps to build the series. Like you can, by looking at this book, like we can really see that art isolated. And I'm amazed that they were given the ability to do it for a project like this.
Well, yeah, I mean, they had amazingly talented people on it. I think the backgrounds were one of the main points of focus. And you had like Nick Cross and Levi Jihanian and Chris Seriotis doing that work. And the fun fact, I don't want to wreck your world, but a lot of those were done in Photoshop, which blew my mind because like they look so hand painted and crafted with actual materials. But no, they were working with just generic brushes on it. But with the second one, I think it was Nick Cross doing every background in that. He really just sort of nailed that aesthetic and the color scheme throughout it. And it's fun. You can see the background saturate from episode to episode, and the only one that kind of contradicts that was the third episode, which was Schooltown Follies. And that kind of rationalized in that the weather became slightly more lush and verdant because they'd found Beatrice, so things were kind of looking up. But besides that, you can see this kind of tonal shift throughout the entire series on that.
Yeah, one of the things I really appreciated was in the book you have an entire chapter for each of the episodes, and so reading the book, I got a picture of the order in which the show was created, and how that really formed the narrative.
It's a little bit different. The first thing Pat came up with was what would become episode 8. I'm trying to think. It was The Ringing of the Bell was his first storyboard.
7.
But they said it was too scary. Yeah. And it's funny. You'd think there'd be a lot of notes for something this dark, but the only note they ever gave the creators was to make Lorena's or evil Lorena's teeth less sharp and jagged, which actually made those teeth look a little bit more frightening. But yeah, they wanted to dive into it on a slightly softer note, and so they did the John Crops episode in the Tome of the Unknown pilot, and then they kind of went from there.
And so that episode is available online. Like I had
Yeah.
not gotten to see the Tome of the Unknown until more recently. So folks, if you look up Tome of the Unknown on YouTube, you can completely legitimately watch the pilot episode, which did not air, which you have not seen. The pilot episode is actually pretty distinct, I think, in some ways.
Yeah,
But
it's really interesting. It wasn't quite as spooky as Pat wanted initially, but I think it looked beautiful. And it's funny, like this is kind of going off topic a little bit, but do you know the Blasting Company, the people who did the music?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that entire plot is about this musician, and of course he's made of vegetables, but he's in this like car made of vegetables, and it breaks down. And the funny thing is, when the Blasting Company were touring, what would methodically happen was they were in this converted vegetable oil touring car, and that car used to break down all the time too. So it was this weird parallel that kind of preceded them coming on, which I always thought was kind of a charming story. But yeah, there you have it.
Wow, that's amazing. That episode to me, like I'm completely obsessed with the series music, and now that the soundtrack is available on Spotify and other formats, I hope everybody else gets it too. But the music in that episode is much more has more connection to like blues, and that's not something which is a musical style which is not really used as much in the show. But I think the first glimpse of the series I had actually was part of the Husk and Bee episode, and I was just struck that somebody was doing early American, like New England choral music on a children's show. Like, I think I just couldn't have been more amazed that someone did that. And I think the range of musical styles that are all coming from American musical traditions in the show, like there's, I actually I listened to the Storm track. I was like, the soundtrack, I was like, I need more of this. And I don't normally listen to these types of music, but like next thing I know, I'm like, I need to hear Stormy Weather. And I'm like looking up Lena Horne on the internet. And sort of pulling for those other associations, listening to Showboat, which a musical I really have not given a damn about prior to this.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the people they got for that was amazing too. I mean, I used to listen to Chris Isaac when I was a kid. And I don't know how old you are, but I used to get in trouble for watching the music video for which game.
Yeah.
And then it was like, yeah, he's posing as this cat, hiding in a giant pumpkin man, doing a Hoagie Carmichael song. But it worked beautifully. I mean, I think Pat really had a knack for picking the right voices. And then Shannon Sussman singing in episode 8, that was beautiful as well. But especially that episode, I think, worked out really well. And especially the song where they go in initially to the barn. The Blasting Company used a startling array of styles that I would never think one set of musicians would be experts at mastering, but they did it really well. And the cool thing is they didn't even use any digital instruments. All that was completely hand-paid.
It paid off. And they had a very famous, singer of American songbook type music. Was it George Jones? I'm sorry, I thought I had this in my notes.
Oh, that's good. Jack Jones, yeah.
Jack Jones, yeah. Who?
AKA the Frog.
AKA the Frog. I have to say, when they pulled back the reveal that he was the Frog, that the Frog had been singing the entry song, and that the Frog could sing, I just thought that was one of the things that made me happiest. I'm telling you. I'm always obsessed with the questions of who decides which animals can speak and which animals can't. So this show is definitely entertained by those questions as well. Like they have all the jokes about the horse. Whose horse is he? Well, if he can speak, he's not anybody's horse. Which animals can talk, which ones can't? We're trying to talk to the turkey, who's pretty much just sitting at a table waiting to be beheaded. And what an amazing inversion it is when it turns out that the Frog, of all the characters, cannot just sing; he can speak, he can sing, and he is George Jones, and he is the storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one actually, like, ironically, or not ironically, when Pat was originally in Concord, when he was in undergrad, that's who he was listening to in Concord the entire time. So it trickled down all that time and still left an impression on him for this project. And then he just kind of went for it and asked him to sing on this song, and Jack said yeah, so it worked out well.
What an amazing thing. The other thing I've really gotten listening to the soundtrack is you have the full versions of all these songs that we only have smaller amounts of in the show. And
Sure.
I'm totally fine with them being shorter in the show because a lot of the time they almost like they're continuing off screen. The music kind of builds the world to be bigger than what you're just seeing. But then now being able to go and listen to the full songs on the soundtrack is just such a treat. And if you haven't heard Langtry's Lament from beginning to end, where she goes through the entire alphabet and various numbers, it just gets better and better. Like when you find out how long Johnny B has been gone for, spoiler alert, not very long at all. Like that stuff, which is all just revealed in the song, and it compounds itself with how funny it is. And I think, when you're trying to get that much story in such a short period of time, you're not going to be able to have the full songs. But now being able to have the rest of them available to us is an amazing gift.
Well, I kind of wish it also included some of the instrumental stuff as well. There's stuff that I have that I just got from research that didn't make on it, and that I think is really quirky. But like the chase sequence, and I think it was episode 9, they were referencing, I think, Bruce Springsteen a little bit, and it's just really entertaining and not very long, but it definitely is more evocative of watching the series just to have all that connective tissue in there too. I don't remember if it made it in, but they also had Pat sings on one of them. And it's an homage to the Ballrooms of Mars, and it's in the episode. It's when Wirt wakes up first. I think in episode 9, and I think that was amazing. And that you realize Pat could be a creative director, an illustrator, an animator, and that's like, oh man, that guy has a set of pipes too. There's a lot of little things like that in the music, but the other cool thing about the music is that a lot of people behind the scenes contributed to the soundtrack too, and worked with the blasting company. So I'm blocking his name, but actually one of the storyboard artists on Babes in the Woods contributed to both of those tracks too. And I think it was more of a collaborative endeavor than I think a lot of people think it is. But I think, at the head of it, I think it was the blasting company definitely providing the right direction and adding the finesse to it.
There are pieces of the instrumental stuff available on the soundtrack, but I'm sure, there's more music that could ever be contained. But yeah, there's a bonus track.
No, don't compromise. You tell them you want the entire thing.
Yes, I want the entire thing. But no, they do have lots of bonus tracks on the digital release now.
Oh, cool.
What was something that you really did not notice or see in the show until you began working on the book that really has been a big eye-opener for you?
Yeah, so I think what happened was, going into it, there's purposeful ambiguity around what the unknown is. And, Pat, who, wrote everything, wrote all the episodes and had the storyline preconceived, he doesn't spell out what it is. And then I was talking with another guy who I don't want to say because of what I'm about to say next. He's like, oh yeah, he's like, Wirt's dying. And this isn't really an adventure with him and Greg. He's just kind of in this liminal space between death, and he's taking all these inputs that he saw when he was alive, and they're filtering through his head right now, forming all these, all these tales and all these narratives that kind of summarize and blanket his life. And I was like, oh man, that's deep. And then if you go back, you can see hints in episode 9 and 10 of characters in the unknown. So you can see a woman in a costume of a bluebird. You can see a woodsman, I think, at some point. There's tons of little hints just splayed throughout it. But then I talked with Pat, and Pat said, yeah, that's kind of it, but it's kind of not. So he still added another blanket of ambiguity. So it's not quite as interpretational than that. And then Amelia Lavari also said it's a little bit more ambiguous than that. But I think just the entire act of walking through episodes 9 and 10 and trying to find the Easter eggs. I don't know if they're Easter eggs because they're valuable to the plot, but the inspiration of some of the aspects that are in the unknown was maybe my biggest eye-opening facet.
Definitely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely does. You know, I hadn't noticed Quincy Endicott's tombstone, for example, until I was looking at the book.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, little things like that. They're all, I mean, like, they go so deep. I just didn't notice it initially, but, yeah, they're all there.
One of the pieces of the show that's just like the smallest snippet that I'm just obsessed with and I could probably watch on a loop till the end of time is the little bit of the Highwayman's song from the Tales of the Dark Lantern, and the fisheye effect that the animation creates, and the ambiguity of why this murderer allowed in this space. Everybody knows he's a murderer. He's sort of standing there in the background, being creepy. Oh, look here. He will tell you all about how he murders people for money. But he's part of this organized system, and therefore he gets to exist there. It's just this amazing little bit. And that, like, 30 seconds of music that was written for it, like, I could just keep playing it over and over again. But his physical motions, it's like very much like old style, like Fleischer animated cartoon motion. I love just seeing how they were able to do that. I saw in the notes for that episode, which I hadn't picked up on until I saw this book, was like, you never see anybody else leave the Dark Lantern, and the lantern itself, if you think about it, is really a metaphor for being trapped. You know, that's where the beast is trapped. His hopes and his fears, they're all on the lantern, and like, so none of these folks are leaving. They're all trapped in the lantern too.
Yeah, absolutely. And per your observation about the animation, there were 2 sequences handmade by Nick. Well, I say Nick Cross. He was the creative director. But he hand animated that as well as the intro piano sequence. So yeah, it's definitely a different take with a few added flourishes that you're not going to see anywhere else in the show. But yeah, that's very observational of you. But yeah, it's an interesting episode in that Pat wanted it to be super, super dark initially, a little bit more horrifying, and Penn Ward, who's the creator of Adventure Time, that's one of the episodes that he worked on. So Penn created the designs for everyone inside, and they're a little bit more buoyant and goofy and quirky than I think Pat initially envisioned. So you have this kind of dark, melancholic, headless horseman vibe to the tavern going on. A little bit of a Sleepy Hollow trickled in there. But then you also have kind of the goofiness to it as well, because of the character designs. I think Pat just kind of navigated that, including the Betty Boop inspired Tavern Keeper as well. But it's kind of funny. Besides the wonderful performance of the Highwayman, it's you get Wirt, who's about to go up, and it's funny because before they actually had him perform, Pat and Colin Dean was the voice actor behind Greg, were yelling. What did they yell? I'm trying to remember. I have it in my notes somewhere.
Sing, Glover, sing. It's in your. I just
they sang Sing, Glover, sing to try to make it more nervous, and I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, like he sort of improvises that melody, and it doesn't quite work. Oh my God! And the voice actor that they have singing, the man who's trying to basically upsell him on having a bigger wedding, is such a blast. It's like not the kind of singing voice you get in contemporary settings at all. It's very, very.
Yeah, I'm blocking his name. He's a musician and he's great. He has a really good NPR Tiny Desk special going on. I'll try to look it up as we talk.
Thank you.
But yeah, everyone he snagged was super ingrained and incredibly talented. He really did get a murderer's row of talent for that. Completely agree.
The line about there's plenty of money for everyone when little boys get married, it just cracks me up so hard as someone who has witnessed the wedding industry as it stands today.
Yeah, right.
And Patton Oswalt, it's just sort of like the character designs within that episode. Like you have the band, which are all colonial dress. You have the master and apprentice who are regency. Like they're kind of time-tossed people in that setting. And then that lovely pencil illustration of a whaling ship as the stage backdrop. I loved that in your book, which everyone can buy now at bookstores nationwide. I got to see like a close-up of a corner of that drawing of the whaling ship from the tavern. And like those little details make me so fucking happy.
Yeah. They're definitely going for a more colonial vibe going there, and it worked out really well for them. But yeah, I have nothing but similar views towards that episode. It really set the tone, in addition to the last one as well, in Pottsville, for the entire miniseries. It did such a great job of it.
Yeah, I mean, the show as a whole is so smart and knowledgeable about art in its art direction, and so knowledgeable about architecture and design motifs and styles in a way that you don't see much of. In the Quincy Endicott episode, when Wirt explains how he can tell that it's not the same mansion, and he specifically is like, well, Endicott's side is more Georgian versus this side, which is more French Rococo. I probably squealed with light because I was like, that is all true, and somebody noticed, and they even have the language for saying those things. And of course, this is the sort of thing that Wirt would know, because that's the sort of shit that I cared about in high school. When I care about it now too, obviously, but you know, kids can be nerdy and not just be completely stereotypical about what interests they have and what kind of things they know. And it was such a smart way to sort of reveal the true nature of that episode. But this is a show that knows those things, and this is a show that thinks it's okay to teach its viewers those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's uncompromising in more ways than one. Specifically, I think, that was the one that was based on one of Pat's dreams, where dreamed he was searching for a house, and the realtor said, "Oh, just go ahead and roam at your own leisure." And he went and he saw this beautiful library, and then he walked through a crack and he realized that it was two conjoined houses. And then he kind of, brought that into the story of two T-Czars and how their developments were overlapping as well. But if you talk to Chris Seriotis, and when I was doing the interviews for this book, he was like one of the first ones, and I was like, "Yeah, so how'd you like it?" He was like, "Oh, it's great." And he was talking about how he's drawing, woods. So he drew a lot of woods. And he was like, "Well, how about the episode Mad Love?" And he said, "Yeah, man, I don't want to talk about that." And he was half joking. But if you look at those Rococo backgrounds, they're nuts. Those took a lot of time and probably some sleepless nights. I don't quite think Nick and Pat wanted Chris to go as far as he did, but I mean, he just knocked out of the park with those. Those things are so gorgeous and very, very detailed.
It sells it. You're like, oh, this is not the same place. I can tell. And also just another thought about how many times there's disconcerting birds. There's so many birds in the series, but like the peacock freak out through the glass. Oh God, it cracks me up. And John Cleese's performance is really an amazing vocal performance from him. I like the story that you shared.
Adelaide too.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, so many of the vocal performances in this are just really masterful. I don't know if folks got awarded for it, but they fucking should have. It hurts to think that they didn't. But yeah, this book definitely has an amazing story, which I won't give away here. People should go buy it, about the conversation that John Cleese had with folks when they brought him on to do Quincy Endicott, or Unky Endicott, as it were. A really lovely little character snippet in the book that I got that you will not find anywhere else.
Yeah, he was there, man. He was, from what I understand, he was, he had opinions. He definitely had opinions about how it should be delivered, but as Pat would say, it definitely benefited the entire production.
Mm-hmm. I mean, really, I don't remember if this was in the book. I feel like for the initial casting call, it said that they wanted it in an Elijah Wood type voice, and then Elijah Wood was like, I want to do it. Is that what happened with the voice casting for him?
I think Elijah Wood was one of the easier ones. I think Greg took a very long time to help cast. And it's funny because I don't know if this is in the book or it's private. Actually, when you think of Elijah Wood in the movies he's been in, his other, like, iconic starring role was they actually casted his opposite in that movie. They thought about casting his opposite in that movie in Over the Garden Wall, but then they ended up just having to go with a kid because they couldn't make the voice a kid enough. I don't know if that made sense, but the person who almost played Greg would have been like a nerdy dream pairing again. But Greg just did such a great job, I think. Colin Dean did such a great job with that as well. But yeah,
an amazing voice.
Was pretty chill. Yeah.
I mean, amazing voice.
Yeah, everyone had a lot of humor on that. It was pretty seamless, I think, from there on out.
Like when Greg missings individual notes during Potatoes and Molasses, it's like exactly the wrong note for a child voice.
Yeah. Have you seen? Do you know what that's based on?
Yeah, Animal Crackers in My Soup, I presume.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny.
The Shirley Temple.
Watch that. Just the parallel, especially with the entire thing of a grumpy old man walking in at the end. It's very much an homage. And I remember I wasn't even researching it. I think I saw that in the background. I was like, oh my gosh, it's the same song. But yeah, Greg nails that, and it's also a nice book balance. It's also a nice bookend to the Latin version at the very end. That's so much more sad as well.
Yeah.
The Latin version of it's said in Latin, and my Latin's really terrible. I think potato and molasses or something along those lines. So they planted that seed of innocence to just corrupt it at the very end. It was very well thought out, I thought.
I mean, Greg basically going off with the beast in the end to try to save his brother because he doesn't know what else to do, and basically just sort of being this would be a European reference, being like a Brothers Grimm protagonist who solves the evil riddles in creative ways, but it all happens off screen. Like he finds the golden honeycomb, like off screen. Like it's all that, like a little segment of the story is just it's not even there. I love that the comics, I mean, it's so amazing that the comics exist so we can actually see some of those in-between bits get brought to life in the earlier series. Have you been able to read those or any of the ongoing comics as well?
Oh yeah, I love Jim. Jim Campbell was a storyboard artist on the show, and now he draws it. And he drew, all the original ones too. So yeah, like what you're talking about is interesting because a lot of those episodes had to be truncated. They didn't have too much time, and so the very first special that had like the land schooners and the kind of goofy warring colonial militiamen, I should say, but they don't actually fight for anything, and there's a baby.
Mm-hmm.
That was supposed to be episode 3, when it was supposed to have a longer runtime. And it was supposed to be kind of an exploration of the unknown through these weird sort of land ships. And then the studio said, no, we like the talking animals and the schoolhouse, so we're going to go with that. And so when Pat did the special, that was the first thing that came to mind. But yeah, the comics are great. You also get to find out more about the woodsman and his daughter and kind of how that panned out too.
Oh God, I had feelings everywhere. So many feelings. messy feelings, but good ones.
Yeah, that's all Maya Lavari, who wrote that. And I think it was some nice closure. I think one of the beautiful things about the show is it keeps you guessing. It implies a lot of endings, but there's no hand holding. So the comics, especially those first, I want to say 6 issues, and the special definitely provides some closure on some of the dangling storylines as well.
I mean, that's one of the things is that like this is a miniseries, and I was skeptical actually that a miniseries could do all of that because we're so addicted to these long form, many-year, many-season shows. That we all love with reason. but like how much depth could really be conveyed in a miniseries. I was questioning if it could actually do that, and of course the series does. But then having the additional comics and the additional ephemera, like and the music now, like it really does give you a wider viewpoint into the unknown and into the story. And yet we know, because they've said so, that there isn't going to be another season. Like, this is it. The world that we have is what we have. Do you have any thoughts about that? How does that sit with you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I would have loved to see some of the episodes that Pat proposed but didn't get made, but they were so dark. So he had like an episode about this guy who made dice out of kids' bones. And then at the end, like, you see these children without bones but are still magically alive kind of swarming him. There was a witch who would dance on people as they slept. There's one where that's supposed to be a little bit more humorous. And, like, back in the day, burglars were kind of romanticized. And there was, like, this story about a burglar who came in and, like, this woman was overjoyed and treated like a celebrity. So there was an episode where was a gentleman burglar. But these were just ideas. They never went into production. I think I would have loved to see those, but at the same time, I think it's almost the perfect length just because of how easily digestible it is, and how they were just able to condense all the goodness in that short amount of time. Not that it'd be bad if they did more, but yeah, I think it's one of its greatest strengths. And it's funny, as the book was coming out, like, I didn't even necessarily like know if other people had the same fascination with it, but the more and more people you talk to, they're just like, yeah, this is great. And like, Hot Topic is releasing lines of merchandise around it. Like, even today, they just came up with a new line of merchandise. I'm like, well, I think its cultural implication just for those 60 minutes is like a lot deeper than I had initially expected.
Yeah, there's tattoos out there I've seen.
Yeah, the cosplay
and so on. Beautiful, amazing cosplays.
I think if we were going to see more in the Over the Garden Wall universe, it would probably be before. I mean, as we saw, there's connections with Adelaide and Beatrice, and I'm blocking her name, but the Sin Eater,
Lorna.
By Tim Curry. No, Lorna.
Yeah,
Lorna
and Auntie Whispers.
Yeah, Auntie Whispers and Adelaide were sisters. And then Enoch. I think if we were going to see anything there, it'd be in that quadrant. A little bit of seeing like Oz before Dorothy got there. But I don't know what Nick and Pat would what they have planned out. Pat's keeping it his lid pretty tight, and he also has the Pinocchio stop motion movie with Guillermo del Toro to write. So I guess we'll just have to cross our fingers. Yeah.
I don't know. I would be shocked if they revisited this, even though there's a lot of money to be had, just because this is really an artistic different project, and I feel like they kind of feel like they did what they wanted, and the comics are continuing to do the interstitial stuff, which I think is really lovely. I mean, I'll tell more if they want it, but I don't expect it of them. But I had not heard about the Guillermo del Toro Pinocchio stuff. Oh my God, that sounds amazing. And when you think about like quirky, interesting animation, like, you think about the Disney movie, the sequence where he gets turned into a donkey and eaten by the witch. When I was a kid, that was the fucking scariest shit. So I love the idea. Yeah,
absolutely. I don't think it's quite on the road to production yet. So I think it's in pre-production. But yeah, my fingers are crossed that gets the funding it needs. But it's interesting you say that. If you talk to people like Terry Gilliam, like, all these people count Pinocchio as a sort of grand, ornate Gothic staple for the type of movies that they do, and Guillermo del Toro is no different, and Pat loves it too. So I would be very excited if this thing comes to fruition.
That's awesome. One of the things I also was thinking about when I was sort of doing more of my episode research and seeing sort of like the blues music from the pilot episode that we didn't get to see in the actual show, and I was thinking about sort of like the way like race is sort of absent from the story in ways that seem a bit strange to me. Like, you know, I love that Sarah, his girl crush, like when you see her, you're like, okay, she's clearly a person of color, although you don't really know if she's what her racial background is, because all you have to go on are hands. But you have this like very American set story, and all these American musical forms that you're drawing from are all coming from, with the exception of like the song, really from Tales of the Hard Times at the Huskin Bee, are still all drawing from like African American music, and
Sure.
like you just don't really have any presence of characters of color, and it's complicated if the story is set in the South and you don't want to like have to address like slavery in a context of like something which is not focused on that and wouldn't really do it justice. But this is in the North, right? So like you really don't have to treat it the same way. And it just feels like it's one area that I think the show kind of left out inclusion in a way that feels a bit weird to me once you begin to think about the musical references in there.
I can't speak for Pat on that one. I would think part of that issue is what you mentioned, whether you find that an acceptable answer or not. I think he was looking back to the time area, trying to make it as colonial as humanly possible. Not the Unknown didn't necessarily have a geography, even though it was inspired by the North. And I think he struggled a lot to try to be true to the era, with making it acceptable for kids without betraying the realities that were there. So I can't speak to that, but that would be my guess for why it seems a little less than diverse.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're dealing with like the fantasy world in space, like there are a lot of things that you can do that sort of sidestep questions of like, what is this person's real story? But like you really do have the opportunity to have like African American characters without having to be about slavery, like when it is it's not rooted in the South, and it's not rooted in war really at all.
Sure.
So I don't know. Those are my thoughts on that. But one of the things I actually thought I'd get some insight in, speaking of Sarah, but I did not, and I don't know if you have any theories on this, is Sarah's Halloween costume. So she has a clown suit. She has a vaguely Dia de los Muertos sort of face paint situation. There's a lot of specific in character design that goes into choosing what costumes Greg and Wirt were wearing, and you can really see that whole journey get played out in the book. But for the modern day settings of the teens, like the teens could really much be wearing anything they wanted, right? So, out of all the potential costumes in the world, they chose for Sarah to wear this like clown outfit with a skeleton makeup. So what does it signify? What does it symbolize? I feel like there has to be a reason for it, because she could be anything, right? I don't know if you have theories.
No, actually, I think I have the answer somewhere, but I hate to do this to you, but I don't really remember it.
No.
Sorry. Yeah, I know Pat came up with that design, and the sketches in there. I think it's something personal. I want to say that. I might be talking off the top of my head, but I think it's something from his youth and from his own personal experiences that he witnessed. But he likes Sarah a lot. Like, I think Sarah's also kind of an aspect of Pat, as much as Pat is also in Greg and Wirt as well. So I wish I had a slightly more concrete answer to that question. I'm happy to email you once I research it and
Thank you.
my Evernote.
Well, I mean, one
absolutely.
thought I might have, Evernote. One thought I might have is that, she's a clown, but she's also has a death's head, so it sort of fits in with some of the ideas around Tales of the Huskin Bee, with sort of this clowning of death that's happening. And to, if the skeleton, apparently, and I got this from your book, that initially one of their thoughts was that there'd be skeletons dressed as gourds, dressed as people, so that there would be people costumes over the pumpkins with the skeletons underneath them. And I'm like, so Sarah's sort of like another layer on that, like a human as a skeleton, and this very sort of lumpy, sort of scarecrow clown-like costume sack body that sort of obscures what's inside. It's a bit disconcerting.
I would
love
to see a crossover between Sarah and Enoch. I don't have an answer for you, but I think that is a very astute and well thought out connection.
Oh, well, thank you.
And who knows? Because Enoch got the lantern at the end of the season, so you never know what hijinks could happen there.
Oh my gosh, he did. Huh.
Even though, I mean, he's a cat. He's not really a pumpkin.
He is a cat.
But yeah.
How can he have a lantern? I don't know. It's confusing.
I don't know. Yeah.
One of the things I really respect about the show also is Sarah. The fact that the girl is a rational actor. Like so much fiction in which the protagonist is a boy who loves a girl and who doesn't know if she loves him or not is rooted in the assumption that women are irrational and unknowable, and also presumes that we like things that are terrible and awful and don't like people for being real and genuine. And I really appreciated how it's like all of this fear is really in Greg's head. You know, the guy who he thinks has it all together is clearly actually played for laughs by us, but his confidence is what enables him to try to do what he tries to do, even though he's a complete loser himself. And that Sarah isn't an object of affection. She's a person. She can be approached like a person, and she's not expecting him to be normal, and she's quirky and he's quirky too.
Yeah, no, she's great. She's definitely one of my favorite characters. And I'm blocking his name. Who's the foil? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, the Funderburker.
Oh yeah, is it that Funderburker?
Yeah,
Jason Funderburker.
Yes, Jason Funderburker is sometimes the name of the frog, certainly the name of the young boy with the awkward voice.
That was actually someone who Amalia Lavari had a pen pal romance with. That was the name of someone who Amalia, who's one of the writers, had a romance with. I think between the three of them, Sarah is definitely the most self-realized and the most aspirational. And, she's in the position of kind of helping Wirt to realize that he's his own biggest enemies, and kind of the obstacles he's constructing, like Jason, aren't necessarily there. He's building him up to be this giant antagonistic guy, but he's kind of nice and dorky and not really much of a threat in any way. So Sarah kind of sees through that. She's the grounding point, and I completely agree. She's wonderful.
Yeah. And I really enjoy Beatrice's, having her own story arc about her own fears and challenges with her family, and and having that little bit with her at the end is really touching.
Oh,
one
yeah.
other thought.
Melanie. Oh, go ahead.
One of the thoughts I have about the end is sort of this, obviously in the end of it, you have a situation where the Beast tries to get Greg to become the new woodsman. And the woodsman himself is sort of a symbol of the failures of adulthood. He thinks he knows what he's doing, but he really is actually all controlled by his fears as well. So the whole story is Wirt is at risk of becoming him, and then he overturns it. And so the story is very much yes, this is Wirt becoming an adult, or moving towards becoming more of an adult, who recognizes that he is his brother's keeper. He does have to take care of him. He does have to be a leader. He does have to be decisive, but not doing it the same way the older adults have done it and have been and are failing at being healthy and integrated people. Because you really don't have any functional adults in this show at all. All the adults are quirky and damaged. It's tragic.
Yeah.
And he has to make a different way for himself. He prevents himself from becoming the new woodsman. But he also does grow older.
Absolutely. And if you want to see what would happen if he hadn't fulfilled himself, there's a version of Wirt, some would say, in Babes in the Woods, when Greg enters the Cloud Kingdom. There's this old man dressed with the red gnomish hat and the blue tunic, except he has a long beard and a lantern. It's kind of a nasty little it's a nasty little side history of what could have been.
Yeah, parallel dimension. and in the fears. My goodness. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was really, it was definitely Wirt's journey to kind of come to grasp with his place and his selfishness as well. And I mean, I think that's one of the reasons that it's when I was learning that it's potentially all happening in Wirt's head, that's his biggest conflict with himself, is his selfishness. So as he evolved as a character, you see him being more caring with his brother.
He really resents him and resents the obligation. And Greg is such an amazing example of exactly how young kids are. Like, the characterization is just so astute.
Yeah, rock facts. I remember when I was first watching it, I don't remember how I discovered it. I think it was a Hulu recommendation. I don't think I'd actually heard of it before, but I just remember laughing out loud at so much of what Greg had said, especially in the third episode. But he's definitely the id towards superego. There's no filter, which is exactly what kids are like.
So as we're coming, and no self-doubt, right? Like, he still believes he can do anything and everything. He hasn't had the world bang him up yet.
No.
So as we come on the closer of an hour, like, is there a thing that you wish that the show could have expanded a little bit more on that you didn't get to have, that you wish that there was a little bit more of?
Well, I mean, I think with the show, what impressed me was it kept on giving me what I didn't know I wanted. So this is a longer conversation, but so when Pat started this, they didn't have many series at Cartoon Networks. So they recruited so many different people who were available in these small pockets, which kind of gave each episode a very distinct flavor. So, I think you'd expect that the second episode would be more dramatic sort of folklore and fairy tales. But no, then they just shift you to sort of rural Americana in the late 19th century. I think if there's anything I would be curious to see, probably the backstory of Enoch, Adelaide, and the rest of them. But besides that, I think it's perfect in its concision.
Agreed. Do you have any suggestions for folks who like the series, who are going to pick up the book to learn more and read more of other animation or other comics that they might be interested in? Not that there really is anything quite in its vein, but you might have some suggestions or thoughts.
For comics, I don't know. I think I'd go back further and check out Gustav Doré, Posada. There's a weird book, and I don't think you can find it because there's no physical copies, but it's called The Complete Optimist by Childe Harold, and that was a huge inspiration as now. It's kind of a weird, dark, inexplicable tome, kind of about filled with these own like little anecdotes and nursery rhymes, but you can definitely see some of the character design in there.
Yeah, I've seen pages of art from that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for more of the Garden Wall, there's like silent movies by F.M. Murnau, McLaughlin Brothers, old storybooks, and the old Disney shorts. So the old grist mill is kind of an homage to the old mill. I think that was a silly symphony. Wink and Blink and Nod, Skeleton Dance, like all of those are very ingrained in Over the Garden Wall.
I would say for folks in the New York area, there's an ongoing animated shorts screening series that, I promptly forgot the name of it, that happens throughout the year in the city. It actually is like old 16-millimeter reels of animated cartoons that were created to be shown at home. They all have all that weird background vignetting, like where the corners of the page are not visible, an effect that gets deployed a lot through this, through the cartoon actually. You see sort of those visuals, the visual origins of that. So here it is. It's called the Cartoon Carnival Film Series in New York City. I'll tweet out a link to it for those who are interested. Get on their Facebook list, and you can see some really interesting early animation that you have not seen before. New York comics.
Man, I'm jealous of you New Yorkers, man. That sounds like a prime destination.
Yeah, I definitely think if you're interested in Over the Garden Wall, come check out some of this animation. Tommy Jose Staiths is the curator. So thank you for joining us. And one more time, where can folks pick up The Art of Over the Garden Wall?
I think just about anywhere at this point. Comic stores, bookstores, online. It's profusely distributed.
Excellent. And it is a beautiful, beautiful book and a beautiful gift. Well, thank you again for joining us. And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about something again.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Listeners, we're going to be back with a non-Halloween themed episode on Monday. We'll be joined by McHale. Oh my gosh, I should check how to pronounce his name, who is the artist and writer and creator of the Capra comic series, which I sort of describe as being like an art comic version of Suicide Squad. If that sounds like fun to you, and it should, then I hope you'll join us on Monday night at 10 o'clock Eastern to talk with him. And then we'll be back the week after that, the 30th, for a Halloween episode again, this time with Kate, from who's the writer of Moonlighters, a new kids comic that is about kids who are who are werewolf hunters. It's a really charming all-ages Halloween book with really cool, diverse cast. So Katie Schenkel, who's the co-creator of that, will be joining us to talk about that series. And that, my friends, is your special October lineup for Graphic Policy Radio. If you came late to the show and you want to hear it from the beginning, you can always get it at our iTunes channel. The episode will be on iTunes shortly. You'll be able to get it on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher within the next few hours. Get it on our website. If you want more from Graphic Policy about comics, culture, and geek world stuff, we're at graphicpolicy.com. I myself am Ilana_Brooklyn on Twitter all the goddamn time, and I am also writing some additional pieces over at Graphic Policy as well. So hope you'll keep up with us, and we will see you next week. Keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.